So when we are putting them in treatment, I'm going to show you now what happens when they go through some stimulation of their imagery. We drive the sensory bus where we bring to consciousness their imagery, whether it's in these or whether it's in comprehension. I'm only going to show you the ones for comprehension only students. And this is us now looking at our comprehension only students. There's their word recognition that's high down here, and their reading comprehension coming in. Their word recognition was at the 61st percentile, but their reading comprehension was at the 32nd, and that's fairly significantly lower than their 42nd percentile in oral vocabulary. Okay, and you can see that they made good gains. They went in reading comprehension with 110 hours of concept imagery instruction. Went from the 32nd percentile to the 50th. But what I really wanted to see was what happens when you look at them where there's a gap between their reading ability. This would be a mild gap where they're reading it between the 25th and the 37th percentile compared to their reading comprehension. So all of these students I'm going to look at now, this is an N of 382, were below the 25th percentile in reading comprehension. Are you all with me? So these are, I sifted them out, and we said, okay, they're really low students in reading comprehension. Let's look at those students, not just the mean of all of them, but just these students. And so these have this, what we call a mild discrepancy. They're high in decoding, but not significantly high. And that's what their pre and post test scores look like. That's from the 9th percentile to the 37th percentile. If I jump up here to the severe category of students that now have hyperlexic characteristics, this is an N of 88. Look how high their word recognition, spelling, word attack, reading fluency, and reading accuracy are. Look at the gap between this and this, and even a gap between their oral vocabulary and their listening comprehension, their reading comprehension. So those students are what we would absolutely say are severe students. And look at this. They went from the 8th percentile to the 53rd percentile in reading comprehension in 115 hours of stimulating that. What code did I stimulate? The nonverbal code. Are you all getting that? Okay. We also have a slide this time on autism spectrum disorders. This is an N of 156 students that came to us as diagnosed as on that spectrum. And you can see, interestingly enough, that when they came in pre, they had some pretty low scores in vocabulary and oral directions. What I think is really interesting is when we developed their what we call concept imagery and also applied that over to vocabulary, this is a very big gain. This is really an enormous gain. What's interesting about this to me is how much better their reading comprehension is than their oral vocabulary. It really should not be that way, but it is. So the whole idea of stimulating their dynamic imagery made a difference. So now I'm going to turn to, if we can do that clinically, one of the things that's driven the bus for us, if we can do it clinically, can we do it in public schools? And the goal of this is to teach reading comprehension based on a theory of cognition, scale up, which means take it out of one school and apply it to full districts and close this achievement gap. So I'm going to quickly go through some of these scores. This is Pueblo School District 60. In 1997, we established a partnership with them, and why this is important is that Pueblo has basically set the standard for what we are trying to do now with other school districts, and that's replicate Pueblo. It was an urban school district, or is an urban school district. They have about 17,000 students. They're primarily a Title I school. Their students are largely Hispanic. 62 and 61% of all the students are eligible for free and reduced lunches. And in 1997, on the CSAP, those students in Pueblo were below the state average with more than 50% of their students scoring in the unsatisfactory or partially proficient range. And why this is important for all of you to be thinking about, there has been some stuff written that says that minority children don't have as high an IQ as other children, that the poor children and the disadvantaged children cannot close the achievement gap because of a basic deficiency in intelligence. And I'm going to show you that's clearly not right. So here's Pueblo. We scaled them up after 11 years. We have all but 2 schools in the district have been involved in a partnership, and those schools are charter schools. By 2008, over 1,500 of the Pueblo teachers have gone through this instruction to develop imagery and verbal processing, and they've put 25,000 students through that kind of instruction. We've taken 10,000, you can see that in that slide. At-risk students have received what we call intensive intervention, which is a couple of hours a day, 5 days a week, to develop their imagery and verbal processing. They just reported to us that they have reduced their special education students. And when we started this morning, do you remember what that slide said? That we are spending $80 billion on special education, and that's largely because they can't read. What Pueblo is saying now is that they report they have reduced the special education population by 30%. And that's because they're working with children in the classroom and also in intensive groups. And they got a lot of attention. By the way, in 2005, they got awards. They were recognized by the President of the United States. And this is why. The state had only about 30% minority when Pueblo had 67%. And on the average in 2005, the third grade children in the state, with very few minority children, were 71 proficient on the CSAP. But after scaling up with the district model, the Pueblo children, those little kids, were 83% proficient, and they got a lot of attention because of that. And so, in fact, this is part of the attention. This was a presentation made at IDA that we did not make. Someone else did this. As he was accepting basically an award, he brought up Pueblo. And what he said was that Pueblo District 60 had a scaled score of 579, and this is on the CSAP test, and these are for the third grade students, but the state only had a scaled score of 564. And so he said, absolutely something happened at Pueblo. Well, in looking at whether or not those children in Pueblo could learn, or whether minority children could learn, he put this slide together. He said a comparable district like Pueblo, the scale score was 530, yet the scale score for Pueblo was 579. The state would be someplace in the middle. So what he was talking about is the shift that Pueblo had made had to be really from something we had done in instruction. And I'm going to ask you again, what was it? It was based on a theory of cognition that we did work with those students. And we developed their verbal and their nonverbal processing. And why he thought this was so interesting, he said, now Pueblo's students have shifted so that these students that are even low may not be as low as the other students. That's a very, very big deal. And got so much attention that an article was written on it that says scaling up educational interventions has been a troubling issue in educational research. This was in something called the AERJ. And it says, despite the ongoing national debate about improving reading achievement in schools, reading research has produced very few studies of the effect. Remember when I talked to you about the silver bullet and how it really hadn't been working, all these things we've been trying? What Sadowski and Wilson are saying in this article is that by scaling up and basing it on a theory of cognition, we got some really large gains, because he's saying still fewer of these studies, not only have they not shown up very well, but still fewer of the studies have focused on instructional programs with a specific theoretical base. And so what we did, our program is, according to Sadowski and Wilson, is employing the principles of dual coding theory. And here's what he says. The emphasis on associating language and multisensory mental images is a direct application of dual coding theory. And these are huge. Unifying reading and writing under the aegis of a theory of general cognition is a timely and scientific step. Any theory of reading or writing that does not eventually align with a broader theory of cognition will not endure, because reading and writing are cognitive acts.